Is a big part of how we all want to think about this space. In Microsoft advertising that focuses on how do we make the most of digital display and how do we think about the future. And what I want to do today is really just give you a view into how do we think about this landscape and think about the ways that the landscape will continue to evolve around this notion of storytelling. Let me start with just the framework of how we think about digital display and the storytelling pillar. When we think about doing research around the world around advertising, we typically don't start with showing actual advertising. We try to get a little bit deeper into thinking about how do we tap into real human behaviors and attitudes and thoughts. And so Steve mentioned I have a background in research, and this is my huge bias in terms of how we go out and think about what it is that we do. And when we go out and we show images like this, people have a very easy time coming up with the story behind this image, right? And regardless of the country or the gender or background or social class, people can very easily tell you, oh, here's some variation of the big monster chasing the little monster, right? And if you probe them further, especially children, they will come up with the emotions behind this as well. There's fear, there's anxiety, there's maybe a whole backstory of revenge that they'll come up with, right? And the mental trick that I think everyone has seen here before is that, in fact, this image is made up of two images that are exactly the same. It's only the shading and added perspective and extra lines and the smudge marks that make the story come to life. This is a really important piece of research that we do to understand how do people create stories around things that aren't necessarily there. And how do we take the tools in our business that maybe because of creative constraints or budgets or not enough people in our team, you're somewhat stuck with two images that are exactly the same and you need to tell a story for your brand. We believe very strongly that digital provides all the extra perspective and lines and smudging, right? That's what allows us to create really compelling stories that leave an emotional connection with the consumer. So we're starting very, very high level, I know, but this is the framework in which we look at storytelling as the core for what digital display does well today and can do even better in the future as we see technologies and consumers evolve. Now, there's another aspect to how we think about this space, and that is looking obviously at the technology side. If we look at the history of media and the ways that media were first invented, but then the ways that people came along and innovated with those inventions in ways that the original inventor did not necessarily envision. We look at television, for example. Television started by putting televisions on a large stage in a playhouse, in a theater, that would project to many, many people. It wasn't until somebody figured out, oh, well, actually, if we made them smaller and didn't try to make them as big as a cinema screen, then more people could have them in their homes, in bars and restaurants, and thus the mass medium was born. I think even more compelling is the history of film, where the first film cameras were developed and used to film playhouses, right? Because plays were the primary way, live theater was the primary way that people enjoyed entertainment. And so film cameras, once developed, were put into the center row, center aisle of the theater and filmed the play. Amazingly, it wasn't for 18 years that someone figured out if we moved the camera closer to the stage, we could actually see the actors' faces, we could create scenes, we could create blocking, and it's that innovation that we see as representative of where we are today. The camera is still pretty much in the center aisle, center row as it relates to digital display. There's been a lot of movement, a lot of improvement in the camera, but we have not yet gone to the place where the camera is now becoming a much more fluid eye for how we look at the world. Those are the two themes I want to set up. And now what I'm going to do is just show you a bunch of examples of how we think that the notion of storytelling is coming to life in ways that might start to represent that camera moving out of the center aisle, center row, closer to the stage and around the actors. And usually when I do this, I have full control of my PC, and I can click through, and I will do this very, very fluidly. But today, I'm going to be shouting commands back to Sergey in the back and letting him know when to play and pause. And so if it's a little bit disjointed, so I apologize for that. And if something fails, they are running a Mac in the back, so I'll just say, not my fault. It's an Apple. OK, so here we go. The first example I want to show you relates to display, relates to social, and these are very custom implementations, so I want to make clear, these are not that easy to build today, but this is where we need to go to get in terms of scale and getting these kinds of implementations more widely implemented. This is a campaign that we worked on with Lexus. Lexus is launching the new CT Hybrid. Hybrid, Lexus don't necessarily go together in a lot of consumers' minds. The target in this campaign was trying to reach a different audience than typically considers Lexus, namely a little bit less affluent, a little bit younger, and also one that is into what we would call hyper sharing, right? So highly, highly, highly social audiences. Click. There we go. Awesome, thank you. So what we did here created a original web series, a challenge where we encourage consumers to look at things from a fresh perspective. And there's a number of elements to this, but the one I want to highlight was where we had consumers sign into their Facebook, and then we linked into their Facebook profile and grabbed all of the data from their profile. And it sounds as sexy as it is, the data being social profile data, where you're from, how many friends you have, et cetera, and then creating a piece of abstract art on the fly. So this is our creative director, Jeremy Grubaugh. This is his Facebook profile come to life in an abstract piece of flash art that's created on the fly out of his friends, their names, from his profile photo, how many friends do his friends have, where do they work, and all revealed in an anonymous way to protect privacy, but creating something that expresses an individual based on their profile simply by logging in. It's this notion of how do we create stories, how do we create emotional connections with consumers that take something like a Facebook profile, which is in a certain UI today, but then bringing it to life in a different way that's very expressive, that's unique, and that you can then share with your other friends on Facebook as your profile photo. We had an element where you could actually print it out, have it skin your PC or your phone, and creating this notion of let's take social data that's out there, but let's turn it into something that people will have a real sense of bond with, some sense of engagement with, because it looks completely different than what they're used to looking at when they think of social. This campaign, by the way, so really interesting in terms of the metrics that came back. There was about, I think, 13,000, we had over 13,000 profiles created in the first 2 weeks of the campaign, and more than, I think, 10,000 of those actually shared out on Facebook. So the notion of how do we generate this kind of viral campaign, I think it's just a really elegant example. There are other examples that have come along since then, and many of you have probably seen the Intel Museum of Me, which I think is a really, really elegant example of taking social data and turning it into something creative. This is an example of a campaign that we ran in Japan for our Windows Phone launch with KDDI, which is the local telecom partner. And same idea, but this really turns it into more of a video ad placement, yet incorporating all the data, again, and photos from a user's profile. So if we could play this, I'll show you, this is taken from my profile, so you'll see, if any of you are friends with me on Facebook, I don't know if Jed's on there, there's photos that are coming in, and this ad was designed to show the particular features of the Windows Phone which make it easy to connect with the people that are most important to you. And what it's doing is these are all photos taken from my Facebook profile, incorporated into the ad. And so there's this element where people look at this and say, wow, how did they do that, right? And thereby demonstrating the value proposition for this particular product, which is all about how do we connect people better with people through this particular device. And again, it's interesting, this has become a really compelling type of vehicle. Again, Intel's done a really good implementation of it. Did you recognize some of our friends here? Yes. So the idea of making ads personal in this way is something that we see a great deal of potential for. Now, I'm going to start to go a little bit further out into the, let's call it, there's an around the corner view of the future, and then there's an around the block, and there's a sort of next zip code sort of view. We're going to go a little bit further now. So this is where, as we see display evolving quickly, both by virtue of consumers' behaviors and attitudes, but also by virtue of the technology, we put a lot of faith in the fact that the way that users navigate the digital world is rapidly evolving, and there are many, many places for us to take advantage of this from a digital storytelling perspective. So this is where I'm going to say play and pause a lot. So play, pause. OK, just testing. All right, so what I'm going to say here is that this is an example of what we did for Intel. Intel has a particular brand challenge around how do they stay associated with innovation and creativity. And so everyone's seen their campaigns in terms of what they try to do with various artists, various celebrities. This is an art exhibit that they sponsor globally. And this happened to be the one that ran in Beijing last year. And it's called the Creators Project. So this is an iconic image from that art exhibit. It's this beautiful curtain of lights that was in the center of the entire art experience. And if we play,